The noise in the basement woke me up. It was 3 in the morning when the creak of the wooden stairs startled me. I never imagined the last words I'd hear from my grandson would be, "Pack a bag. We have to get out of this house now." The look on his face was something I had never seen before, pure fear. As we drove through the darkness away from the home where I lived for 37 years, I realized that sometimes those we love are the ones who hurt us the most, and sometimes it's the ones we least expect who end up saving us. But before I continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching. My name is Emily Miller. I'm 69 years old, and this is the story of how I discovered something terrible was in my basement. It all started with small symptoms: morning headaches, persistent nausea, dizziness when I stood up. At first I thought it was just age. Our bodies change as we get older, Dr. Peterson said when I visited him after fainting at home. I had tests done. I took vitamins. I tried changing my diet. Nothing helped. My son Robert came by often. Always worried, always helpful. "I'll take care of everything, Mom," he'd say. And he did. He hired a cleaning lady who came twice a week. He made small repairs around the house. He installed new ventilation systems. He modified my bedroom to improve air circulation. Back then, I only saw a dedicated son. The house I live in was built by my husband, Charles, brick by brick back in the 80s. Charles was a mason, a man who believed that manual labor was the purest form of expression. He spent 4 years building our house, designing every room, installing every door, nailing every floorboard. When he died of a heart attack 5 years ago, I felt like part of the house died too. Robert always had a complicated relationship with his father. While Charles worked with his hands, Robert prided himself on his engineering degree. While Charles valued simplicity, Robert sought status. The tension between them was palpable at every family dinner. When Luke, my grandson, started showing an interest in carpentry like his grandfather, the distance between father and son only grew. Luke showed up at my door one Sunday afternoon. I wasn't expecting him. He was covered in dust, a 24-year-old man with his grandfather's eyes and hands calloused from the same kind of work. "Grandma, we need to check something in the basement," he said without much explanation. I thought it was strange, but I followed him to the basement door. He went down alone, asking me to wait. I stayed in the kitchen staring out the window at the garden Charles had planted. The tomato plants needed new stakes, I thought distractedly. When Luke returned, his face was white as a sheet. He put his phone on the kitchen table, slid it toward me, and said only, "Pack a bag. We have to get out of this house now." "What? Why?" "Please, Grandma, trust me." His voice was trembling. "Just take the essential. Medicine clothes for a few days' documents. I'll wait for you in the car." Something in the urgency of his voice made me obey without question. In 50 years of adult life, I had never packed a bag so quickly. 10 minutes later, we were in his truck, leaving behind the house Charles built, where we raised our children, where I planted every flower in the garden. "Luke, for God's sake, what is going on?" He drove with his eyes fixed on the road, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. "Robert is poisoning you, Grandma." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "My son? Impossible. What are you talking about? That's insane." Luke pulled over at a roadside diner on the outskirts of a border town. It was a neon-lit place, empty at that time of night. He took out his phone and showed me the pictures he had taken in the basement. "Look at this. Under your bedroom." The images showed pipes, wires, and a small metal box with a digital timer. "That's a controlled release system for carbon monoxide. It was installed recently, hooked up to the house's heating system. When the heater kicks on at night, this releases small amounts of gas into your room." My mind refused to process what he was saying. "Robert, my son, trying to kill me. It can't be. There must be another explanation. The modifications to your room, the sealed air vents, the disabled carbon monoxide detector, your symptoms. It all adds up." My phone rang. It was Robert. Luke shook his head. I let it ring until it stopped. It rang again almost immediately. He must have realized we're gone. I stared at the phone as if it were a snake about to strike. Why would he do this? Luke took a deep breath. "Money, the house, the life insurance. Robert is drowning his debt. He lost his job 6 months ago and didn't tell anyone." His words seemed to come from far away, as if he were speaking underwater. "My son, my Robert, the baby I held in my arms, the one I taught to walk, to read, to be a good man, trying to kill me slowly and methodically." My world fell apart as I sat in that cheap diner in a border town, my untouched coffee growing cold in front of me. We spent that night in a motel in a coastal town. I didn't sleep a minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the images of that device under my room counting down the hours to my death. I saw my son's face, imagined his hands installing it while I slept upstairs, trusting him completely. Luke slept in the armchair in the room, refusing to leave me alone. In the morning, as the sun began to filter through the thin curtains, he was already on the phone. "Yes, officer. We have proof, photos. The device is still installed in the house. Yes, Yes, I understand. We need protection. He hung up with a frustrated look. They want more evidence before they do anything. They need to see the device themselves. Let's go back then, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. It's too dangerous, Grandma. Robert might be there. It's my house, the house your grandfather built. I'm not going to let them turn it into a death trap. Luke hesitated, but he agreed. Hours later, we were parking 2 blocks away from my house in my hometown. The police car was waiting for us, just as we had arranged. Mrs. Miller, the officer asked. I'm Detective Miller. Your grandson explained the situation, but I need to see it for myself before we can take any action. We walked in silence to my house. Robert's car wasn't in the driveway, but that didn't mean he wasn't nearby. Do you have a key? The detective asked. Yes, and my daughter Martha does too. Let's be quick then. Luke opened the door with his key. The house was silent, exactly as we had left it the night before. My teacup was still half full on the kitchen table. The book I was reading was still open on the sofa. The detective followed Luke to the basement while I waited in the kitchen, feeling like a stranger in my own home, as if it were now a foreign, hostile place. I looked out the window, and my heart almost stopped. Robert's car was turning the corner. He's coming back, I shouted. Luke and the detective ran up from the basement. We found it. It's exactly as he said, the detective confirmed, pulling his phone from his pocket. I'm calling for backup. Robert's car pulled up in front of the house. He wasn't alone. My daughter Martha was in the passenger seat. Damn it, Luke muttered. They're both in on this together. Robert and Martha walked in without knocking. When they saw the detective, they stopped short. Mom, what's going on? Robert asked, his worried expression too perfect to be genuine. We know what you did, Luke said, positioning himself protectively in front of me. Mr. Robert Miller, the detective intervened. We found a device installed under your mother's bedroom designed to release carbon monoxide. Do you know anything about that? Robert's mask of concern faltered for an instant. His eyes met mine, and in that moment, I knew. It was true. My own son had planned my death. This is ridiculous, Martha jumped in. Luke has always had problems with us. He's trying to turn Mom against us. The device is down there, Luke shot back, with your fingerprints all over it, Uncle Robert. I installed a more efficient heating system, Robert said with studied calm. Luke is misinterpreting. A system that releases carbon monoxide into her room, the detective asked. That's absurd, Robert raised his voice. Mom is confused. She's been having hallucinations because of her age. She's getting more and more forgetful. The slander hit me like a slap. Not only did he try to kill me, but now he was trying to make me seem senile. It's all documented, Mr. Miller, the detective said, showing the photos on his phone. You modified the air vents in her room, installed a fake carbon monoxide detector, and placed a controlled release gas device under the floor. Robert's face hardened. All pretense of concern vanished. You don't understand, he said, his voice low and intense. We lost everything. The bank is going to take our house, the kids' private school, Martha's husband's treatment. We needed the money. I heard those words as if they were coming from a stranger, not the child I had raised. So you decided to kill me, I finally spoke. Your father built this house to protect us, and you turned it into my tomb. It would have been quick, Martha chimed in, her voice cold and calculating. You would have gone to sleep and not woken up. No one would question it. Old people die every day. Sirens wailed outside. The backup had arrived. Robert and Martha exchanged glances. In a sudden move, Robert lunged toward me. Luke stepped in front protectively, but Robert shoved him hard, knocking him down. The detective tried to intervene, but Martha blocked his path. Mom, you have to come with us, now, Robert ordered, grabbing my arm forcefully. I looked at my son's face, searching for any sign of the boy I knew. I found nothing but desperation and greed. No, I said firmly, yanking my arm free. It's over, Robert. The front door burst open, and 2 uniformed officers entered. Robert backed away, knowing he was cornered. Robert Miller and Martha Miller Silva, you are under arrest for attempted murder. I watched in silence as they handcuffed my children. The people I had brought into the world, whom I had loved unconditionally, were now being led away like criminals, because that's what they were. When the door closed behind them, I sank to my knees on the living room floor. Luke held me, his broad shoulders shaking with my sobs. How did I not see it? I asked through tears. How did I not see what was happening? It's not your fault, Grandma, he whispered. They betrayed your trust in the worst way possible. I looked around at the house Charles had built with so much love in our hometown. Every wall, every nail, every board had been placed by him with care to create a safe home for his family. Now that home had become a death trap, transformed by the hands of his own son. I can't stay here anymore, I said softly. I'll never feel safe in this house again. Luke nodded, understanding. Let's go. You can stay stay with me until we figure out what to do. We left together, closing the door on a house that would never be a home again. The police station smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. I sat on a hard chair across from Detective Miller as he took my statement. Luke was by my side, his steady presence the only comfort in that cold, impersonal place. "So, Mrs. Miller, how long ago did you start feeling these symptoms?" the detective asked. "About 3 months. At first it was just morning headaches, then dizziness, weakness, nausea. And your son Robert started the renovations on your house when, about 4 months ago. He said he wanted to improve the house's energy efficiency, seal up old drafts, install new ventilation systems." The detective took notes, his face unreadable. "You never suspected." The question hit me like a slap. Of course I didn't suspect. What mother would suspect her own son is trying to kill her? Robert was always ambitious, I answered slowly, but I never thought he would go this far. Luke took my hand. His fingers had calluses in the same places as Charles's. Workers' hands. "We'll need a warrant to access their bank accounts," the detective explained. "But from what we've already discovered, your son is drowning in debt, his house is about to be foreclosed on by the bank, and your daughter's husband needs expensive treatment for a kidney disease." "My insurance money and the house," I murmured. "Exactly. Around $800,000 in total. Split between your 2 children, it would have been enough to solve their financial problems." The coldness of the calculation made me sick. My life reduced to a dollar amount weighed and found wanting compared to my children's debts. Later in Luke's small apartment in a nearby city, I sat on the makeshift bed in the living room and tried to process everything that had happened. The walls were thin, and I could hear the sound of traffic outside. Luke came in with 2 cups of tea. His apartment was simple but cozy. Tools were organized meticulously in a corner. Woodworking projects were scattered on the counter, so much like Charles. "How did you find out?" I finally asked. He sat across from me holding his mug with both hands. "I'd been suspicious for a while. When you started getting sick, I researched your symptoms. They all pointed to carbon monoxide poisoning." He took a sip of tea before continuing. "Then I noticed the modifications to the house. The sealed air vents all concentrated in your room. The detector that seemed to work. But when I checked it, it was disabled on the inside. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I needed proof. I didn't want to believe Uncle Robert and Aunt Martha were capable of it. A deep pain shot through my chest. Not just for what my children tried to do, but for the fact that Luke had carried this burden alone, protecting me until he was sure. "What happened between you and your father?" I asked. "You never talk about it." Luke was silent for a long moment. "When I decided to follow in Grandpa's footsteps with carpentry, instead of going to college, he cut me off. Said I was throwing my life away, wasting my potential. He always wanted you to be like him," I commented. "An engineer, respected, successful. But I wanted to be like Grandpa, to build real things with my own hands, things that last." Silence fell between us again. Outside, it started to rain heavy drops hitting the window. "Robert always had a complicated relationship with your father," I said quietly. "Charles was a simple man, proud of the work he did. Robert wanted more, status recognition money." "I remember the arguments," Luke said. "Grandpa would say a man's character was in the work he did and how he treated others. Dad said that was a poor man's philosophy." I remembered those arguments at the dinner table. Charles with his rough hands and sun-weathered face, Robert with his expensive suits and poorly concealed contempt for his father's work. "Your grandfather built our house in 4 years," I told him. "After work on weekends on holidays. Robert never wanted to help. He said manual labor was for people who weren't smart enough for anything better. And now he used that intelligence to turn Grandpa's work into a death trap," Luke said bitterly. The irony wasn't lost on me. Robert, with his education and technical knowledge, had used those skills not to build but to destroy, to kill his own mother. "How did we get to this point?" I asked more to myself than to Luke. "Greed," he answered simply. "Desperation. Dad always lived beyond his means, always wanting to show off his success. When it all fell apart, he chose the easiest way out." The next day I was given permission to go back to the house and get more of my things. Luke insisted on coming with me. The house felt different now, tainted. Every room, every familiar object brought back memories that were now stained by betrayal. In my bedroom, I looked at the ceiling where the fake monoxide detector was still installed. I thought about the nights I spent there sleeping peacefully while the gas slowly seeped in, poisoning me. I opened the closet and started picking out clothes. In the back, I found an old shoebox. Inside were the letters Charles wrote me when we were young, his blueprints for our house, detailed drawings of every room, every door, every window. "Grandma," Luke called from the doorway, "I found something you should see." He led me to the office where Robert often worked when he came to visit. In a locked drawer that the police had opened, Luke found a notebook. "It's Dad's handwriting," he said, handing me the notebook. The pages contained detailed calculations. emissions, gas flow rates, carbon monoxide concentrations, estimates of exposure time, and most disturbingly, a timeline. Month 1-2 initial symptoms, headaches, fatigue. Month 2-3 intensification, nausea, mental confusion. Month 3-4 significant deterioration, fainting, weight loss. Month 4 final result. My son had methodically calculated how long it would take to kill me. He had planned my death like an engineering project with stages and deadlines. The tears came without warning, not for what almost happened to me, but for the loss of the children I thought I knew, for the complete destruction of the family Charles and I had built. Luke took the notebook from my shaking hands and held me. "Let's get out of here," he said softly. "This isn't your home anymore." I looked one last time at those walls, Charles's work now desecrated by the hands of our own son. "No," I agreed. "It's not." As I left, I stopped on the porch and touched the doorframe hand-carved by Charles. A final goodbye to a home that would never be mine again. In the following months, my life turned into a legal nightmare at the state capitol. Statements, hearings, meetings with lawyers. The case attracted local media attention. It's not every day that middle-class children try to kill their own mother for money. Robert and Martha were formally charged with attempted murder conspiracy and several other crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. The device in the basement, Robert's meticulous records testimony from neighbors who saw him doing frequent renovations. What shocked me the most were the emails between Robert and Martha recovered by the investigation. "Mom is getting weaker. The plan is working. 1 more month and it will all be over. Are we sure no one will suspect? What if they ask for an autopsy? Old people with heart problems die all the time. I'm monitoring the symptoms. It will look natural." My own children coldly discussing my death as if it were a logistical problem to be solved. The first time I saw them at the preliminary hearing, I barely recognized them. Robert, always so careful with his appearance, looked disheveled in the orange prison jumpsuit. Martha, my girl, who was always so vibrant, was pale and gaunt. They didn't look at me once during the entire proceeding. The prosecutor called me the day after the hearing. "Mrs. Miller, we have enough evidence for a trial," he explained. "But if they confess, we can avoid this long and painful process for you." Would they confess? Their lawyers are suggesting the possibility of a deal, reduced sentences in exchange for a full confession. Part of me wanted them to face the full force of the law, to pay for what they tried to do. Another part, the mother that still existed in me, despite everything, couldn't bear the thought of seeing them rot in prison for the rest of their lives. "What kind of reduced sentence?" I finally asked. Robert would get 15 years with the possibility of parole after 10. Martha, for having a secondary role, 10 years with possibility after 6. Even reduced, they were long sentences. Robert would be almost 60 when he got out. His children, my grandchildren who barely knew me, would be adults. "I need to think," I replied. That night, sitting in Luke's small apartment in the city, I looked out the window at the illuminated skyline and tried to understand how we had reached this point. "What do you think I should do?" I asked Luke, who was working quietly on a woodworking project at the small counter in the corner. He stopped, placed the tool on the table, and turned to me. "I can't tell you what to do, Grandma. It's your decision. But I want to know what you think." He sighed deeply. "Part of me wants them to pay for every minute of suffering they caused, for betraying you in the worst way possible." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But another part understands that in the end, they are still your family, and that maybe someday you'll want some kind of, I don't know if reconciliation is the right word, reconciliation." The word seemed absurd in this context. How could I reconcile with people who had coldly calculated my death? "I think I want to see them," I said suddenly, "before I decide on the deal." Luke looked at me worried. "Are you sure it's going to be hard?" "I need to look them in the eyes. I need to understand." 2 days later, I was sitting in a cold room at the state prison waiting. Robert entered first handcuffed, escorted by a guard. He sat across from me, separated by a metal table. The son I knew was gone. In his place was a defeated man with deep dark circles and a broken look in his eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Why, Robert?" I asked directly. "I want to hear it from you." He looked down at his handcuffs. "We were losing everything. The house, the savings, my children's future. So you decided to kill me." I didn't see another way out. I was desperate. Desperate to the point of slowly poisoning your own mother. Robert didn't answer right away. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "I told myself it would be quick, that you wouldn't suffer, that at your age it would just be falling asleep and not waking up." The coldness of his words sent a chill down my spine. Even now he was trying to justify the unjustifiable. "Your father built that house to protect us," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "He put in every brick, installed every pipe, thinking of our safety, and you used that same work to try and kill kill me. Dad was always your priority, Robert answered with sudden bitterness. Your precious manual laborer. It never mattered how hard I worked, how successful I was. It was always his work that you valued. Does that justify what you did? Nothing justifies it. He admitted, the anger vanishing as quickly as it came. I am so sorry, Mom. I know it will never be enough, but I am sorry. I looked at my son and didn't recognize the man in front of me. Where was the boy I held in my arms? The teenager who made me so proud with his brilliant grades, the promising young man who seemed destined for great things. Your lawyer mentioned a deal, I finally said. Yes. Do you want me to take it? The question caught me off guard. After everything, he was still seeking my approval. I want you to do what you think is right, Robert, for the first time in your life. I left the prison feeling strangely empty. The conversation with Martha had been just as difficult. She cried more, begged for forgiveness, talked about her husband's expensive treatment, about the young children who needed her. On the way back, sitting in the car next to Luke, I was silent for miles. They're going to take the deal, I finally said. How do you feel? I don't know. Empty. Like a part of me died in that house. Luke drove carefully, his eyes fixed on the road. Grandpa always said that forgiving isn't forgetting. It's just choosing not to let the pain consume you. I don't know if I can ever forgive Luke. I don't know if I want to. You don't have to decide that now, Grandma. Some wounds take time. Others never heal completely. We spent the rest of the drive in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I reflected on the choices that brought us here, the small decisions, the unresolved resentments, the unmet expectations that added up over decades culminated in this family tragedy. Robert and Martha accepted the deal the following week. The formal confession was read aloud in court. Every word was like a knife in my heart. The premeditation, the cold calculation, the patience with which they planned my death. The defendants confessed to deliberately installing a carbon monoxide release system in the victim's residence programmed to release the gas in increasing amounts during the night, with the aim of causing the victim's death in a manner that appeared natural, motivated by the desire to obtain financial gain through inheritance and life insurance. Sitting in the front row, I listened to it all with a calm that surprised me. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe I was just too tired to feel anything but a deep, painful resignation. The judge accepted the agreement. Robert was sentenced to 15 years, Martha to 10. Before they were taken away, the judge asked if I would like to make a statement. I initially shook my head. Then suddenly, I stood up. Yes, Your Honor, I would like to say something. I approached the microphone, my legs trembling slightly. I looked directly at my children, who kept their eyes fixed on the floor. My husband Charles dedicated 4 years of his life to building our home. Every wall, every floor, every system was installed by him brick by brick to create a safe home for our family. That was the legacy he wanted to leave. My voice broke for a moment. I took a deep breath and continued. That house sheltered our family for nearly 4 decades. It was where I raised my children, where we celebrated birthdays, Christmases, graduations, where we mourned losses and celebrated achievements. It was a place of love and protection. I looked directly at Robert, who finally raised his eyes to mine. You transformed your father's work, his love, into a weapon to kill me. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed his memory, the legacy he left. Silent tears streamed down Martha's face. Robert remained stoic. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. I don't know if I want to, but I know that Charles would be devastated to see what his children became. I returned to my seat next to Luke, who took my hand as the guards led my children away to begin their sentence. We left the courthouse under the curious gaze of reporters and onlookers. The story had spread. The old woman nearly murdered by her own children for her inheritance. Are you okay? Luke asked when we got to the car. No, I answered honestly. I don't think I'll be okay for a long time, but I'm alive, thanks to you. He smiled sadly and started the car. Where to now, Grandma? I looked out the window at the gray winter sky. Forward, Luke. It's the only way to go. The house sat empty for months. I couldn't go back to living there. Every room was contaminated by the memories of what almost happened. But I couldn't bring myself to get rid of it right away either. It was the last physical link to Charles, to the life we built together. I continued to stay in Luke's small apartment. He insisted I stay as long as I needed, transforming his sofa into a bed every night, never once complaining. We need to talk about the house, he said one morning over coffee. We can't just let it sit abandoned forever. He was right, of course. The bills kept coming. The garden Charles had planted with such care was dying without anyone to tend to it. The neighbors had started to complain. I can't imagine strangers living there, I confessed, using the cabinets Charles built, sleeping in the rooms where we raised our children. What if it wasn't strangers? Luke suggested cautiously. I looked at him confused. "I've been thinking," he continued, "the room where that device was installed, it can be completely rebuilt. I can redo the floor, the walls, everything. Make it safe again." "You want to live there?" "Not exactly," he hesitated. "Actually, I was thinking about both of us. You could take the master bedroom, the one that was Grandpa's. I'd take the old guest room." The idea took me by surprise, going back to that house even with Luke. "I don't know if I could sleep there again," I admitted. "I understand. It was just an idea." He smiled, not pressing. "Anyway, we need to decide what to do with it." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling of Luke's apartment, thinking about the house Charles built in our city, about the way he would measure twice before cutting, the precision with which he aligned every piece, the pride in his eyes when he showed off his work. I remembered Luke as a little boy following his grandfather around the house, watching his every move, asking endless questions that Charles answered with infinite patience. "Grandpa, why are you sanding the wood again? It's already smooth." "Because good work takes patience, Luke. Perfection doesn't come on the first try." In the morning, as Luke was getting ready for work, I made my decision. "We're going to renovate the house," I announced. He stopped halfway through putting on his jacket. "Are you sure?" "Not for me to live in. At least not right now. But I can't let your grandfather's work be lost. And I don't want strangers living there." Luke smiled, a grin that lit up his face in a way I hadn't seen in months. "Can I start this weekend?" he said. "We can start," I corrected. "I'm not going to be just a spectator this time." We started with the room where the device had been installed. Luke ripped out the entire floor, revealing the space where Robert had placed the deadly mechanism. Together we cleaned everything, removing every trace of what had happened there. We worked on weekends and some evenings after Luke's job. He taught me how to sand wood, how to measure precisely how to cut along the line. "Grandpa would be proud of you," he said one night, watching me apply varnish to a new shelf. "You have steady hands." I always thought I had no talent for this. Charles tried to teach me, but I was too busy with the kids with my job as a teacher. It's never too late to learn. As we restored the house, we were also restoring something in ourselves. The pain didn't disappear. I doubt it ever will completely, but it transformed into something more manageable. The manual labor had a therapeutic effect that no session with psychologists had managed to provide. One day we found a box hidden behind a false wall in the office. Inside were Charles's old notebook, detailed drawings of the house notes on every stage of construction, even a journal where he recorded his thoughts. Sitting on the dusty floor, Luke and I spent hours reading those pages. Charles's careful handwriting, the precise sketches, the reflections on what it meant to build a home for his family. "Finished Robert's room today," one entry read. "He shows no interest in what I do, but I hope one day he understands that every nail, every board is an expression of my love for him, that this room will protect him and shelter his dreams." The tears came without warning. Luke put his arm around my shoulders, and we cried together for the first time since it all happened. We cried for what we lost, for what could have been, for the betrayal that tore our family apart. But we also cried in relief for still being alive, for having found a path through the darkness. After 3 months of constant work, the house was unrecognizable. The room where Robert had installed the deadly device was now a bright office. The walls had been painted in vibrant colors, chosen by Luke to chase away the shadows, as he said. The ventilation systems were completely redone, following Charles's original plans that we found in his notebooks. Luke installed state-of-the-art carbon monoxide detectors in every room, testing them obsessively. One Saturday, as we were painting the living room, Luke paused and looked at me seriously. "Grandma, there's something I've been meaning to tell you." I put my paintbrush down, noticing the tension in his voice. "What is it?" "I met someone, an interior designer who's working on a project with me. Her name is Elena." I smiled, genuinely happy for him. "That's wonderful, Luke. She wants to meet you. In fact, she had an idea for this house that she'd like to share with you." A few days later, Elena came to have dinner with us at Luke's apartment in the city. She was a woman with an easy smile and intelligent eyes who clearly adored my grandson. "Mrs. Miller," she said after dinner, "Luke told me the story of your house. What happened there?" I looked at Luke, who nodded encouragingly. "I work with traumatized spaces," Elena continued. "Places where terrible things have happened. I believe that spaces can heal just like people." "And how do you do that?" I asked, intrigued. "By completely transforming them, giving them a new purpose, one that honors what happened, but doesn't let the tragedy define the space forever." She took a portfolio from her bag and opened it on the kitchen table. "These are some of my projects. A house where a murder occurred transformed into a community center, an apartment where an entire family died in a fire, now an art studio for at-risk kids." The photos showed bright, welcoming spaces full of life. Nothing in them suggested the tragedies that had occurred there. "Luke mentioned you were a teacher," she said, "for 35 years, elementary school. What if we transformed your house into an educational space in our city, a place where children could learn carpentry art music, a living memorial to your husband, not to what your your children tried to do. The idea hit me with an unexpected force. Charles had always talked about teaching carpentry to the neighborhood kids when he retired. He never got the chance. The heart attack took him first. A school for manual arts, I murmured. Charles would have loved that. Luke told me your husband believed in the value of a job well done in the dignity of manual labor, Elena continued. I imagine a space that honors that legacy. I looked at Luke, who was watching Elena with obvious admiration. Did you already know about this? I asked him. We talked about some possibilities, he admitted. But the decision is yours, Grandma. It's your house. It's the house Charles built, I corrected gently, and I think he would approve of this idea. In the following weeks, we worked with renewed energy. The house wouldn't just be restored, it would be transformed. Elena brought her design expertise, creating functional spaces for workshops, classrooms, and community areas. Luke led the construction, faithfully following the principles he learned from his grandfather. He hired a few carpenter friends to help with the heavy lifting, but he insisted on personally making all the pieces that required the most precision. As for me, I discovered an unexpected talent for project organization, for ensuring that Charles's vision was present in every detail. On one particularly exhausting day, I sat on the newly built porch watching the sunset. Luke and Elena were working inside their voices, and occasional laughter drifting out to me. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Not the absence of pain, that was still there. It probably always would be, but a sense that something good could come from even the worst betrayals. That Charles's legacy wouldn't be the attempted murder, but this new purpose for the house he built. The Charles Miller School of Manual Arts was inaugurated 6 months later in our city. We got funding from the city council and donations from local businesses. Luke would be the head carpentry teacher. Elena would handle the design classes, and I, despite being retired, would return to teaching. Not math or English like before, but coordinating integrated projects that would unite art and practical knowledge. On opening day, I looked around at what we had accomplished. The house was unrecognizable, and at the same time more true to Charles's original vision than ever. What do you think? Luke asked, stopping beside me as we watched the neighborhood kids curiously exploring the new rooms. I think we transformed an attempted death into a celebration of life, I replied. And that's the greatest victory we could have. A year passed. The school was thriving with a waiting list for every class. Luke and Elena were engaged planning a simple wedding in the garden we had rebuilt in the back of the house. I was living in a small apartment near the school now, just a short walk away. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the house. Some memories are too hard to overcome. But I spent my days there teaching, coordinating, watching with satisfaction as the children learned to create with their own hands. One autumn morning, as I was organizing materials for the afternoon class, the school secretary found me with a worried expression. "Ms. Emily, there's a letter for you from the prison system." My heart sped up. In all this time, I hadn't had any contact with Robert or Martha. I didn't answer the letters they tried to send in the first few months. I had my lawyer handle any legal matters that came up. With slightly trembling hands, I opened the official envelope. It was a notification. Robert had requested a visit. The prison system wanted to know if I would accept. "Is something wrong, Grandma?" Luke walked into the room, his hands still covered in sawdust from his last class. "Robert wants to see me." Luke tensed immediately. "You don't have to go." "I know. After everything he did." "I know, Luke." We were silent for a moment. Through the window, we could see the children playing in the garden during recess. "I think I have to go," I answered slowly. "Not for him. For me." Luke frowned, worried. "Do you want to go with you?" "No, this is something I have to do alone." A week later, I was sitting in a visiting room at the prison in a city upstate waiting. My heart was pounding, and I had to control my breathing to stay calm. The door opened, and Robert walked in, escorted by a guard. He looked older, thinner, his hair cut very short. The prison uniform hung on his body as if it were too big. He sat across from me, separated by a metal table. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Thank you for coming," he finally said, his voice hoarse, as if it wasn't used often. "Why did you want to see me, Robert?" He fidgeted with his handcuffs. "I heard about the school. It's in the local papers. The transformation of the house. What you did. It's impressive." I didn't respond. I hadn't come all this way to hear empty compliments. "Dad would have liked it," he continued. "It was the kind of thing he always wanted to do." "Yes, it was." Another silence. Robert seemed to struggle with his words. "I'm in therapy here, part of the rehab program." "That's good." I've been thinking a lot about what I did, about why. He looked at me directly for the first time. It wasn't just about the money, Mom. I think you know that. What else could it be then? Anger, resentment, against Dad, against you, against the life you valued and that I always despised. His words took me by surprise. I didn't expect such self-awareness. I always felt inferior around him, Robert continued. It didn't matter what my grades were, my degree, my job. In his eyes, I would never be as good as a man who worked with his hands. Your father was proud of you, Robert, in his own way. Maybe, but I never felt it. And I twisted that resentment into something monstrous. And he took a deep breath before continuing. When I started to lose everything, the job, the house, the status I had built, it was like something broke inside me. Like everything I had done to prove my worth had been for nothing. And that justifies trying to kill me. No, nothing justifies it. His voice trembled. I'm not looking for justification or forgiveness, Mom. Just understanding. For myself, maybe more than for you. I studied his face, searching for the son I had raised. Somewhere behind those tired eyes, there were traces of the boy I once loved unconditionally. Are your children okay? I asked, surprising both of us with the question. Yes, they're with their mother. She has permission to see them once a month. And Paul, Martha's husband, he passed away last year. Kidney complications. Another silence. Heavier this time. Why the school, Mom? Why transform the house like that? I thought about the answer for a moment. Because we couldn't let what you and Martha did be the final word for that house. It was built with love, to protect and nurture. That's what we needed to restore. Luke is involved from what I read. Yes, he's the head carpentry teacher. A sad smile crossed Robert's face. Like Dad, he became what I never could be. He found his own path, Robert, just as you found yours. Robert lowered his head, defeated by the simple truth of my words. I'm never getting out of here, am I? Even with the possibility of parole. I don't know. That will depend on a lot of things. Do you think someday you'll be able to forgive me? The question hung between us, heavy, inevitable. For a long time, I thought the answer would be a definite no, that some betrayals are too big to be forgiven. But sitting there looking at the broken man in front of me, I realized a more complex truth. Forgiveness isn't something I can just decide to give Robert. It's a process, a journey. I'm trying to walk it. Not for you, for me, he nodded slowly. It's more than I deserve. It's not about what you deserve. It's about what I need to keep living. We sat in silence again. Finally, I stood up. I have to go. I have a class to teach this afternoon. Robert stood up too awkwardly because of the handcuffs. Thank you for coming, Mom. I wasn't expecting it. Neither was I admitted. I turned to leave. Then I stopped at the door. Charles used to say that building something is easy compared to fixing what's broken, but that the repair, when it's done right, often makes the piece stronger than it was before. Robert didn't answer, but I saw in his eyes that he understood. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation, just the acknowledgement of a distant possibility. I left the prison feeling strangely light, as if a weight I didn't even know I was carrying was finally starting to ease. Not completely gone, I doubt it ever will be, but made more bearable. On the way back to the school in the city, I stopped at the cemetery where Charles was buried. It wasn't a planned detour, but I felt the need to be there after the meeting with Robert. The grave was simple, just as Charles would have wanted. A granite stone with his name, dates, and the inscription I had chosen. He built with love. He lived with integrity. You would be proud of the school, Charles, I spoke aloud, sitting on the nearby bench. Children learning to work with their hands to create beautiful and useful things, exactly like you always wanted. The wind gently rustled the flowers I had brought last week. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened with our children, what drove them to do what they did. Maybe some things aren't meant to be understood, only accepted. A leaf drifted down, landing on the headstone. But we are rebuilding, Charles. Not the same thing we had before. That's gone forever. Something new. Something that might be even more meaningful. I got back to the school in time for my afternoon class. A group of children was waiting for me, excited for the day's project. Small wooden treasure boxes, just like Charles had taught me to make decades ago. As I explained each step, showing how to measure twice before cutting, how to sand with patience, how to fit the pieces together precisely, I felt a familiar presence beside me. Not in a supernatural way, but in the living memories that filled that space. Charles was there, I knew it, in the clumsy but enthusiastic hands of the children, in the smell of freshly cut wood, in the sound of tools on the workbench. And somehow, that certainty was enough. The school bus pulled up in front of the school one spring morning 2 years after the inauguration. 30 children piled out, led by smiling teachers. A field trip from a public school in a nearby town. Luke greeted them at the gate, already wearing wearing his work apron. "Welcome to the Charles Miller School of Manual Arts," he said, his smile spreading to the children. "Today, you're going to learn to build something with your own hands." I watched from my office window as he led the group to the carpentry shed out back. Elena joined them carrying boxes of colorful materials. Our little school had grown beyond our expectations. What started as a personal healing project had become a recognized educational center in the city. We offered free classes for public schools and scholarships for children from low-income families. The funding came from donations, partnerships with local businesses, and the tuition from the regular classes. The house that Charles built, which almost became my tomb, was now a place of creation and learning. I turned my attention back to the papers on my desk. A letter from the prison. Martha would be eligible for parole next month. Her lawyer was asking if I had any objections. I didn't. After the visit with Robert, something had changed in me. Not complete forgiveness, perhaps, but a form of acceptance. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. "Ms. Emily, there's a man here in the reception who wants to talk to you. He says he's from the press." I sighed. Ever since our school won a state award for alternative education, reporters showed up frequently. "I'll see him," I replied. The man waiting in the reception didn't look like a typical reporter. Older, gray-haired, simple clothes. "Mrs. Miller," he asked, extending his hand. "I'm Anthony Vargas. I worked with your husband in construction many years ago." Surprised, I shook his hand. "You knew Charles for almost 2 decades. We were friends as well as colleagues." I invited him into my office, intrigued. Charles rarely spoke about his work colleagues. "What can I do for you, Mr. Vargas?" He pulled a worn leather envelope from his bag. "I found something I think you should have. I was cleaning out my basement and found these drawings Charles made." He opened the envelope and pulled out yellowed sheets of paper. Blueprints, sketches, detailed notes. "This is the original project for a carpentry school he wanted to build when he retired," Vargas finished. "Charles talked about it a lot. It was his dream." My hands trembled as I touched the papers. The familiar handwriting, the precise drawings dated 1998, almost 20 years before his death. "He never showed me these plans," I murmured. "Charles was private about his dreams, said he didn't want to build expectations until he was sure he could make them happen." I studied the drawing. The project was surprisingly similar to what we had implemented, even though we had done it all without ever seeing these plans. "How did you know about our school?" I asked. "I saw the story in the newspaper. I recognized the house immediately. Charles showed off pictures of it so many times, proud of every detail." "And you kept these drawings all this time?" "Charles gave me copies for a professional opinion. Then, well, life happens. We drifted apart as people sometimes do. By the time I heard about his death, it had already been almost a year." He paused, looking out the window at the children who were now playing in the garden. "When I saw what you did with the house, transforming it into the exact kind of school he dreamed of building, it seems that somehow his dream found a way to come true." I called Luke, who came quickly from the shed, still with sawdust in his hair. "Luke, this is Anthony Vargas, a friend of your grandfather's. He brought something you need to see." When Luke saw the drawings, his eyes filled with tears. He ran his fingers over the lines Charles had drawn, as if he could connect with his grandfather through that touch. "This is incredible," he whispered. "It's almost exactly what we built." "Without us ever having seen these plans," Luke finished, amazed. "It's as if, somehow, as if he was guiding you," Vargas suggested with a kind smile. I wasn't looking for a supernatural explanation, but the coincidence was too powerful to ignore. Somehow, without knowing Charles's plans, we had built his dream. "Did he talk about this project a lot?" I asked Vargas. "Constantly. It was his great ambition for retirement, a place where kids could learn practical skills they don't teach in regular school, where they could discover the value of creating something with their own hands." Luke passed the drawings to Elena, who had joined us, drawn by the murmur. "This is extraordinary," she commented, studying the drawing. "The rooms are laid out almost exactly as we designed, without ever having seen this." Vargas stayed for lunch. He shared stories about Charles that I had never heard. Adventures on job sites, challenging projects, moments of camaraderie. "Charles talked about you and the kids a lot," he mentioned as we had coffee after the meal. "He was so proud when Robert got into the engineering program." I exchanged a look with Luke. Robert's name was rarely mentioned at the school. "He had high hopes for Robert," I continued cautiously. "He wanted him to follow his own dreams, even if they were different from his." "Yes, he mentioned that several times. He used to say that deep down, engineering and carpentry weren't that different. Both were ways of building, of creating." Those words stayed with me after Vargas left, promising to return for a longer visit, maybe even offer a special workshop for the students. That night, sitting on the balcony of my apartment in the city, I reflected on the past and the present we were building. Charles's drawings, now framed and hanging in my office at the school, seemed like a tangible link between what was lost and what had been reclaimed. A week after Vargas's visit, I received an unexpected phone call. "Mrs. Miller, this is the prison hospital. Your son Robert suffered a heart attack. He's stable now, but he asked to speak with you." My heart leaped. Despite everything that had happened, the idea of Robert sick alone in a prison hospital bed stirred a maternal instinct in me that I thought had died. "Tell him I'll be there tomorrow," I replied after a short silence. Luke insisted on driving me to the hospital upstate, though he agreed to wait outside. The security was tight. Metal detectors, pat-downs, and escort to the medical wing. Robert was pale, hooked up to heart monitors. He looked older than his years, his hair now more gray than dark. He opened his eyes when I entered, a look of surprise and relief crossing his face. "Mom, you came." "Of course I came," I replied, sitting in the chair by the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone who almost died." Ironically appropriate, don't you think? Even sick, his tendency for sarcasm remained. "What did the doctors say?" "Coronary blockage. Hereditary, probably. Like Dad." The mention of Charles hung between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Can they treat it?" I asked. "They already did. Angioplasty. I have stents now." He paused. "The doctor said I was lucky. If it had happened during the night, I probably wouldn't have survived." The fragility of human life never seemed so clear to me as in that moment. Robert, who had so methodically planned my death, almost lost his own life to the same ailment that took his father. "I saw about the school in the papers," he commented after a long silence. "It looks impressive." "It's a good place," I replied simply. "We're doing good work there. Luke is involved from what I read." "Yes, he's the head carpentry teacher." Robert stared at the ceiling, avoiding my gaze. "Dad would have approved. He always wanted to do something like that." "We know. A friend of his showed up recently with the original drawings Charles had made for a carpentry school, surprisingly similar to what we created without ever seeing the plans." Robert turned his face toward me, genuinely surprised. "He never told me about that. There were a lot of things you two didn't share." "Yeah," a deep sigh. "So many things left unsaid, so many missed opportunities." We fell silent again. The heart monitor beeped steadily, a constant reminder of the fragile life he had been willing to take. "The heart attack made me think," he said finally, "about Dad, about you, about what I did. And what did you think? That maybe he was right all along, about what really matters, about building something that lasts, not just making money and status." His words sounded genuine, without the calculating tone I had learned to distrust. "You know what's funny," he continued. "Here in prison, I've been participating in a woodworking program. Ironically, it's the only thing keeping me sane." "You in a woodworking program?" A faint smile appeared on his face. "I started it as occupational therapy, but I found out I like it. There's something about the work, the precision, the patience it takes, seeing something take shape under your hands. Your father used to say the same thing. I know it's too late for a lot of things," Robert said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand a little of what he tried to teach me all those years." I looked at my son, this familiar stranger who had tried to kill me and who now spoke with a sincerity I hadn't heard from him since he was a boy. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that reminded me of when he was 7 and would come to my bed during storms, scared of the thunder. "It's never too late to understand," I replied finally, "even if it's too late to fix." "Do you think he would forgive me, Dad, I mean?" The question took me by surprise, not because of its content, but because of the genuine vulnerability with which it was asked. "Charles was a man who believed in second chances," I answered carefully. "He valued the ability to learn from mistakes, to rebuild what was broken. And you, Mom, will you ever be able to forgive me?" The question I always knew would come eventually. The question I still didn't have a definitive answer for. "I'm trying, Robert. Not for you, for myself. Hate and resentment are too heavy to carry for the rest of my life." He nodded, accepting the most I could offer at that moment. "Martha gets out on parole next month," I commented, changing the subject slightly. "I know. We're not exactly in touch. Things got difficult after Paul died." "Does she have somewhere to go?" "Her oldest daughter will take her in, from what I understand." We sat in silence again, each lost in our own thoughts. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the barred window. "I have to go," I said, standing up. I have a class to prepare for tomorrow. Thank you for coming, Robert said, his voice weak. It meant a lot. At the door, I stopped and turned back. Take care of yourself, Robert. Follow the doctor's orders. I will. I left feeling strangely light, as if something that had been trapped inside me for years was finally starting to loosen. Not complete forgiveness, maybe. That still seemed too distant, but a small step towards some kind of peace. Luke was waiting for me in the parking lot, looking worried. How did it go? He asked, opening the car door for me. Surprisingly, okay. I got into the car, thought, he had a heart attack, like your grandfather. Is he in danger? Not immediately. They gave him an angioplasty. Luke drove in silence for a few minutes before asking, did he talk about, not directly, but he seemed genuinely sorry. Do you believe him? I looked out the window at the passing city, reflecting. I think I do, which doesn't mean I trust him, or that I ever will again. Luke nodded, understanding the complexity of what I was feeling. He mentioned he's in a woodworking program at the prison. I commented, almost laughing at the irony. Said it's the only thing keeping him sane. Luke looked at me surprised. Then he turned his eyes back to the road. Grandpa would be laughing at that, he said finally. Or maybe not, I replied. Maybe he'd just be relieved that Robert finally understood what he tried to teach him for all those years. Time passed. The seasons changed. The school thrived, growing beyond the space of the original house. We acquired the neighboring lot, and Luke led the construction of a new shed for advanced workshops. Elena and Luke got married in a simple ceremony in the school garden, surrounded by friends, students, and their families. I watched them exchange vows under the large oak tree that Charles had planted when we bought the house. I promised to build our future with the same care and dedication I learned from my grandfather. Luke said, his voice strong and clear, measuring twice, cutting once, and making sure every piece fits perfectly. Elena, radiant in a simple dress she had designed herself, responded. And I promised to bring color and design to our life together, transforming the space we build into a true home. Sitting in the front row, I wiped away silent tears. Charles should be here, I thought. He should see the man his grandson became, the school his dream inspired, the life that continued to flourish despite everything. After the ceremony, during the small reception, I noticed a hesitant figure at the entrance to the garden. Martha, thinner, her hair now completely gray, she watched the celebration uncertainly. I walked over to her, surprising myself with the lack of bitterness I felt. You came, I said simply. I didn't know if I'd be welcome, she replied nervously. I can leave if you prefer. Did Luke invite you? Yes, he sent an invitation to my address. I was surprised. I looked at my grandson, who was dancing with Elena in the center of the garden. He had mentioned he was thinking about inviting Martha, but hadn't confirmed his decision. Another example of the generosity of spirit he had inherited from Charles. You are welcome here today, I said finally. This is a day of celebration, not grudges. Martha looked frail in her simple dress, her wrinkled hands clutching a small purse. Prison had left deep marks on her. The school is incredible, she commented, looking around. I read about it in the papers. You're doing wonderful work. Thank you. We stood side by side, watching the celebration. There was no need for words. What could we possibly say to each other after everything that had happened? Luke noticed Martha's presence and walked over to us, Elena at his side. Aunt Martha, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming. Congratulations, she replied, shaking his hand, and then Elena's. You make a beautiful couple. Have you seen our school? Elena asked with her characteristic kindness. Only what I read in the papers. I'll show you around after the reception, Luke offered, surprising me again. If you have time. I would love that, Martha replied, visibly moved. I moved away, letting them talk. I needed a moment alone to process what was happening. I found a quiet bench under a tree and sat watching the celebration from a distance. Someone approached. Anthony Vargas, Charles's old friend, now a frequent visitor to the school and an occasional guest instructor. May I join you? He asked. Of course. He sat down, a glass of champagne in his hand. A beautiful couple, he commented, watching Luke and Elena, who were now chatting animatedly with a group of friends. Charles would be proud. Yes, he would. Is that your daughter? He asked, noticing Martha, who remained separate, clearly uncomfortable. Yes, I offered no further explanation, and Vargas was sensitive enough not to ask. Everyone in our city knew the story. It had been front-page news for weeks. Do you know what Charles used to say about families? He commented, after a moment of contemplative silence. What? That they're like houses. You have to build them on a solid foundation, but even the best structures sometimes develop cracks. The important thing isn't avoiding the cracks. That's impossible. It's knowing how to repair them them when they appear. I looked at him surprised by the insight of the observation. Charles said that many times, especially when he was facing difficulties with his children. I glanced back at Martha. She was now talking with one of the school's teachers, still visibly tense, but making an effort. Some cracks are too big to be repaired, I commented. Maybe, but Charles also used to say there are always new materials, new techniques, that sometimes you don't fix something to be exactly as it was before. You rebuild it to be something new, something different, but still functional. The words resonated deeply within me. It wasn't about restoring what was lost, that family that existed before the betrayal. It was about building something new from the rubble, something that acknowledged the past without being defined by it. A few months after the wedding, Elena announced she was pregnant. The news brought a joy I didn't think I was capable of feeling again. A new beginning, a new generation free from the weight of the past. Will it be a boy or a girl? I asked during a dinner at my apartment. We don't want to know yet, Luke replied, holding Elena's hand. We prefer the surprise. Have you thought about names? I asked. Elena and Luke exchanged a knowing look. If it's a girl, we're thinking Elisa, Elena replied, smiling at me. The tears came immediately, impossible to hold back. And if it's a boy? I asked when I found my voice. Charles, Luke replied simply. That night after they left, I sat in my apartment thinking about cycles and rebirth, about how life continues even after the worst betrayals, about how love persists, finding new channels when the old ones are blocked. I picked up the phone and made a call I had been putting off for months. Detention Center, how can I help you? I'd like to schedule a visit with Robert Miller, please. The following week, I sat once again in the prison visiting room upstate. Robert looked better than on my last visit. He had regained some weight and his color was healthier. Mom, I didn't expect to see you so soon. I have news, I replied, getting straight to the point. Luke and Elena are expecting a baby. His face lit up genuinely. That's wonderful. When? Next spring, early April probably. A baby, he repeated as if savoring the word. I'm going to be, well, technically I'll be a grandfather. I didn't correct the hesitation. Legally, he was still Luke's father despite everything. Biologically, he would be the child's grandfather. But what role he would actually play in this new being's life? That was a much more complex question. If it's a boy, they're naming him Charles, I told him. Robert was silent for a moment, his eyes softening. And if it's a girl, Elisa, he smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. Perfect names. We talked for almost an hour. For the first time in years, we spoke not about the past, about what was lost or destroyed, but about the future, about possibilities, about hope. When I stood up to leave, Robert said, Mom, I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think I'll ever get to meet my grandchild, even if it's just through pictures? The question was too complex to answer right then. I can't promise that, Robert. It's not just up to me. Luke and Elena will have the final say on who is part of their child's life. He nodded, accepting the answer. I understand, and I respect that. At the door, I turned back one last time. But I will talk to them. That's all I can promise right now. The relief and gratitude in his eyes were palpable. On the way back, I reflected on the cycles of pain and healing, on how families can be shattered and maybe just maybe rebuilt in different, wiser ways. Not as they were before, but as something new forged in the hard lessons of the past. Spring arrived, and with it came Charles Robert Miller, 8 pounds and 2 ounces of pure promise. With his dark hair and curious eyes, he seemed to soak in the world with an intensity that reminded me so much of Luke and of the grandfather whose name he carried. I held him for the first time in the hospital, marveling at his perfection, at the way his tiny fingers wrapped tightly around mine. He already has strength in his hands, I commented to Luke, like you did, like your grandfather did. Maybe we have another carpenter in the family, Luke replied, beaming. Or maybe an artist, Elena added, smiling. Or an engineer, I said quietly. Who knows what he'll choose to be? Luke looked at me, understanding what I hadn't said explicitly. Later, when we were alone in the hospital room, Elena nursing little Charles, Luke pulled me into the hallway. You mentioned him on purpose. My father. I didn't try to deny it. Yes. Why? I thought carefully before answering. Because he is a part of who you are, and a part of who little Charles is, whether we like it or not. Luke was silent, processing my words. You visited him recently, didn't you? He finally asked. Yes, to tell him about the baby. Another long silence. He asked to see Charles someday, even if it's just pictures, I continued. I told him the decision would be yours, and Elena's, of course. Luke leaned against the wall, the exhaustion of the sleepless night clear on his face. I don't know if I'm ready for that, he confessed. You don't have to decide now. now, or ever if you don't want to. What would you do, Grandma? The question caught me off guard. I looked at the nursery through the glass windows at the little bundles of potential and hope. I think every child deserves to know their full story eventually. The good parts and the bad, it's part of who they are. Even when that story includes attempted murder, especially then, I replied softly, because only by knowing the whole truth can they make informed decisions about who they want to be. Luke looked down at his hands, strong hands calloused from honest work so similar to his grandfather's. I need to think about it, he said finally. Talk to Elena. Of course. We went back into the room where Elena had fallen asleep with the baby safe in her arms. Luke watched them with so much love that I felt my heart expand. This was it, I realized. Charles's true legacy. Not the house he built or even the school his dream inspired, but this love, this ability to build and rebuild bonds even after the worst storms. Weeks later, during a quiet afternoon at the school, I found Luke in the carpentry shed, working on a small wooden cradle. His movements were precise, focused, each piece measured twice before being cut. For Charles, I asked, watching him work. Yes, I want it to be special. I picked up one of the already sanded pieces, feeling the perfect smoothness of the wood under my fingers. Elena and I talked, he said without looking up, concentrating on his work. About my father. I waited, not pushing. We decided we're going to send him a picture of Charles. Just that, for now. I think that's a good start, I replied gently. Luke set his tool down and finally looked at me. I'll never fully forgive him for what he did to you. I'll never trust him like I used to. I know, me either. But Charles deserves to know his whole story like you said, even the hard parts. I nodded, moved by my grandson's wisdom. And maybe, he continued, returning to his work, maybe it's time to build something new, not to forget what happened, but so we aren't defined by it. As I watched him work, I saw Charles in him, not just in the gestures and the manual skill, but in the ability to see past the ruins, to imagine something new, where others would only see rubble. In the cradle Luke was building for his son, I saw the promise of a new beginning, a new foundation being laid brick by brick, piece by piece. And maybe that was the true meaning of forgiveness. Not forgetting the past or denying the pain, but the refusal to let the pain have the final word. The determination to build something new, something better from the ashes of what was lost. Your grandfather would be so proud, I said softly, almost to myself. Luke smiled, continuing his meticulous work. I know, Grandma, I know. Now if you liked this story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments what part left you speechless. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to get access to exclusive videos that I don't post here. I'll be waiting for you there.